Welcome back to The Lost Tactician, where the grit of survival meets the depth of forgotten history. Now picture this, a medieval battlefield camp, hastily erected as armies converge, the rain-soaked earth, fog rolling across makeshift structures, and yet these temporary wooden shelters don't collapse into mouldy ruin within weeks. They endure. For months, sometimes years, they stand against dampness, decay, and the relentless assault of European weather. Modern assumptions would suggest rapid deterioration, but archaeological evidence tells a different story, one of unexpected longevity that, really challenges everything we think we know about medieval preservation. Today, we're uncovering the ingenious methods that kept these battlefield shelters from becoming biological disasters, revealing techniques so effective they might hold lessons for our own time. The survival paradox, when temporary becomes enduring. Archaeological excavations across former battlefields in France, England, and the Low Countries have unearthed something remarkable: wooden post holes, structural remains, and preserved timbers from military encampments that show surprisingly little decay given their exposure to harsh conditions. These weren't permanent fortifications with stone foundations and careful drainage systems. These were rapid deployments, structures thrown together as armies moved, yet some endured far longer than our modern understanding of untreated wood would predict. The paradox is striking. How did soldiers operating under time pressure, limited resources, and constant threat of attack manage to create shelters that resisted the very forces of nature that should have consumed them? The answer lies not in a single miraculous substance, but in a sophisticated understanding of material science that medieval soldiers and camp followers possessed through generations of accumulated battlefield wisdom. These weren't educated alchemists working in laboratories. They were practical men and women who understood that survival depended on making the most of what the landscape provided. Their knowledge was empirical, tested under the harshest possible conditions, where failure meant exposure, disease, and death. The compound solution, nature's arsenal against decay. The coating that protected medieval battlefield shelters wasn't a simple application of one substance. Instead, it represented a layered approach using multiple natural materials that worked synergistically. The foundation often began with animal fats rendered from battlefield casualties or livestock slaughtered for provisions. These weren't merely smeared onto wood surfaces. They were carefully heated and combined with other substances to enhance their preservative qualities. The fat created an initial moisture barrier, but alone it would have oxidized and become rancid, actually attracting pests and potentially accelerating rot. The critical addition came from pine pitch and birch tar, substances soldiers could harvest from trees surrounding encampments. Pine pitch, extracted by heating pine wood or collecting natural resin seepage, contains compounds with natural antimicrobial properties. Medieval soldiers would heat this pitch until it reached a workable consistency, then blend it with the rendered fats to create a spreadable coating. Birch tar, produced through a simple process of heating birch bark in covered pits, added additional water-resistant properties and contained phenolic compounds that actively inhibited fungal growth. But the truly overlooked component was wood ash from cooking fires, mixed into these preparations. Ash isn't merely an inert filler, it's highly alkaline, creating a pH environment hostile to most molds and fungi. Campfires produced ash constantly, and soldiers learned that incorporating this waste product into their coating mixtures extended the protective properties significantly. When applied to wooden posts and structural timbers, this compound created a multi-layered defense. The oils penetrated wood fibers, the pitch sealed the surface, and the alkaline ash created a chemical environment where mold struggled to establish itself. The application of these coatings required timing and technique. Soldiers didn't just randomly slather substances onto wet wood and hope for the best. Whenever possible, timbers were treated before erection, allowing the coating to penetrate deeply into the grain. The mixture was applied warm, which made it more fluid and enabled better absorption. In the controlled chaos of military camps, this work often fell to specialized laborers or to soldiers rotating through camp duties during rest periods. The coating worked on multiple levels simultaneously. The fat layer repelled water through simple hydrophobic action. Water beaded and ran off rather than soaking into the wood grain. The pitch created a semi-flexible seal that moved with the natural expansion and contraction of wood in changing humidity, preventing cracks where moisture could penetrate. The alkaline ash component fundamentally altered the wood's surface chemistry, making it inhospitable to the spores that would otherwise colonize damp timber. This wasn't a permanent solution. No coating lasts forever. But it extended the viable lifespan of temporary structures from weeks to months or even years with periodic reapplication. Contemporary documents occasionally reference these practices obliquely. Military supply records mention requisitions for pitch, tallow, and oils in quantities that exceed what would be needed purely for lamp fuel or cooking. Instructions for camp construction sometimes include cryptic references to preparing timbers or sealing posts, though the specific recipes were considered common knowledge, barely worth detailed documentation, which is precisely why they've been lost to us. Now, this preservation technique, you see, was actually part of a much broader system of environmental awareness that medieval people really had to develop out of necessity. Camp placement, for instance, wasn't just random. Experienced commanders would always look for elevated ground with natural drainage, and they'd make sure to set up away from stagnant water sources where disease could easily take hold. The orientation of shelters was also carefully considered, taking into account the prevailing winds, both for proper ventilation and, to keep rain from driving straight into openings. Ditches, interestingly enough, weren't just defensive features. They were used to channel water away from living spaces, which helped reduce ground moisture and, in turn, slowed down the decay of wood. The materials chosen for roofing really complemented all these efforts. Thatched roofs, made from bundled reeds or grasses, if constructed properly, could shed water quite efficiently while still allowing air to circulate, which prevented condensation from building up. Canvas or linen coverings, often treated with linseed oil or beeswax, gave even more protection, and somewhat surprisingly, these fabrics actually got stronger when damp and had natural properties that resisted mold far better than most modern synthetic materials. Medieval people even understood that certain varieties of flax produced fibers more resistant to rot, and this insight influenced the cultivation choices in regions that supplied armies. Lessons from the mud, modern applications of ancient wisdom. The sophistication of these medieval preservation techniques, really challenges our tendency to view historical peoples as primitive or ignorant. They didn't have our chemical analysis tools, but through careful observation and, generations of accumulated knowledge, they developed solutions that actually worked. This ancient coating system is, in a way, biomimetic engineering before the term even existed, using natural materials in ways that enhanced their inherent properties rather than fighting against them. Today, as we grapple with sustainability challenges and look for low-impact preservation methods, these medieval techniques offer, I think, some unexpected inspiration. Disaster relief organizations and humanitarian agencies are constantly struggling with temporary shelter deterioration in refugee camps and disaster zones. Modern chemical treatments, while effective, often carry environmental costs, require industrial production, and might not be locally sourced. The medieval approach, using readily available natural materials combined through simple processes, it suggests alternatives worth exploring. Contemporary research into bio-based construction materials increasingly validates what medieval soldiers knew from experience, that natural oils, resins, and alkaline compounds can effectively protect wood without the need for toxic chemical preservatives. The technique also reminds us that effective solutions, honestly, don't always require technological complexity. In situations where supply chains are disrupted or where modern materials are unavailable or unaffordable, the ability to create protective coatings from animal fats, tree resins, and fire ash could prove invaluable. This isn't just some romantic nostalgia for a simpler past. It's about recognizing that knowledge systems developed under resource constraints often display a kind of elegant efficiency that technological abundance can actually obscure. The story of medieval battlefield shelter preservation is, at its heart, about human ingenuity under pressure. Soldiers facing the dual threats of enemy action and environmental degradation simply couldn't afford failure. Their solutions, refined through trial and error over countless campaigns, represent survival knowledge that really deserves recovery and respect. These weren't miraculous secret formulas tucked away in dusty grimoires. They were practical techniques born from necessity, available to anyone willing to observe nature, experiment with materials, and learn from results. As we confront our own challenges, environmental, humanitarian, logistical, the past offers not perfect blueprints but principles worth considering. The medieval approach to preservation teaches us to look first at what's locally available, to understand materials deeply rather than superficially, and to recognize that sustainable solutions often involve working with natural properties, not overwhelming them with industrial force. If this exploration of forgotten battlefield wisdom resonated with you, do help us continue uncovering the lost knowledge that connects history to endurance. Hit that like button, share this video with anyone fascinated by practical history, and subscribe to The Lost Tactician for more insights into how our ancestors survived, adapted, and sometimes, even surpassed what we imagine possible. The past has lessons still to teach, if we're willing to listen. Until next time, stay curious, stay resilient, and remember that sometimes the most sophisticated solutions are hiding in the simplest places.